welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker and I just sitting back and watching all the signings happen throughout the NHL. I believe at this point we're at 120 signings, 241 contract years, and a total contract dollar amount of $721,325,000. A crazy free agent signing day, not just because of the signings, but also just all the deals, everything that happened at the draft. Everything just feels like this has been a whirlwind of the last 10 days or so. And because of that, we are here to talk about all of it. So we're going to use the free agency just to kind of frame our conversation, but we'll be jumping in and around the draft. We'll be jumping back to the expansion draft a little bit and talking about Seattle. So much going on. Justin, I just want to get your initial take on how you felt today as several of these players were signing all over the NHL.
I was quite surprised at the number of signings, to be quite honest. I mean, this is a flat cap year. It's supposed to be, the time when GMs are saving money. We looked at Seattle, right? We saw their expansion draft, and they only came out with literally $1 million over the floor as far as cap hit is concerned. And so you're thinking, okay, great. All these teams are budgeting. We saw some moves to move some money. And then what the frick? They come out within an hour. They've given away $500 million worth of contracts. And I'm like, freaking hey, I don't even know where to start with most of these. It's ridiculous. We'll start with Seattle then, just because they're our newest franchise. Obviously, they did their expansion draft, and like you said, they kind of maybe underwhelmed, but it was pretty obvious they were going to use their financial muscle or their cap muscle to bring in some talent, and that they did. They go and they sign Alex Wenberg out of the Florida Panthers, only 26 years old, the center. He will slot somewhere probably on their second line. Who knows? He could be their first line center though, based on what they already have. And then Jaden Schwartz comes in. He signs for $5.5 million for 5 years. And then I think the biggest ticket of them all. I mean, you're talking about a potential Vezina Trophy winner, Philip Grubauer. And not only do they bring in a excellent goaltender, but they steal him away from the Colorado Avalanche. Not that we were super sure he was going to re-sign there, especially after they finally get it done with Landeskog. But stealing Grubauer away from Colorado, is it like Colorado's one weakness now? I mean, maybe there's something else in the pipeline for Colorado, but I don't see where they're going to get their goaltending from. Pavel Francouz? Yeah, no, thank you. I'll pass.
Actually, Colorado's one of the few teams that hasn't done anything today.
Yeah, literally anything. I mean, look, Grubauer, he's a Vezina finalist. We all knew that. He's tied for lead league, 7 shutouts. He had phenomenal numbers this year. Comes in and signs with Seattle at it's a small number for a starting goaltender, Vezina finalist at $5.9 million. And you look at a team like Colorado who, listen, we know Joe Sakic is a little tight when it comes to spending money. But, maybe he's thinking long-term about Nathan McKinnon saying, hey, guess what? This guy's going to need a contract extension next year. And clearly he's going to cost me $10 to $11 million plus. So, and he hands out $9 million, no problem, to Cale Makar, who, yes, you know what? The guy's a phenomenal defenseman, but, he's only been in the league for a couple of years. And, shoot. You know what? Colorado waited so long on this. They couldn't get the deal done quickly enough to where literally every decent starting goaltender, Jonathan Bernier,
Mrazek,
Braden Holtby, Mrazek, Freddie Anderson, all these starters are all snagged up now, and there's really nothing left in the cupboards for Colorado to go after. I mean, literally the only goaltender I can think of that maybe, is of that, Philip Grubauer caliber or maybe better is Tuukka Rask. But, as far as I know, he's probably not returning back to Boston. I mean, they just went out and signed Linus Ullmark, so he's not coming back. And, Tuukka Rask came out earlier this year and said, you know what, if I'm not playing in Boston, I'm probably going to retire. So,
I don't know what Colorado's going to do now at this point.
Yeah. I mean, it's
going to have to trade, I guess.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, the $9 million for Cale Makar, I have no problem with that. I mean, absolutely no problem. It's very, very reasonable. You look at what they locked up Landeskog for, $7 million a year, very reasonable as well. I think he was probably hoping for something more in the $8 million range, and they were hoping for something more in the $6 million range. And I think that his contract's good because you're like, ooh, that I probably like he maybe left some money on the table had he gone and signed somewhere else. But the Avalanche definitely, like, he didn't give them a huge hometown discount or anything. I think that because of the way that he plays too, maybe that deal doesn't look as good later on, but it's likely that if you really needed to, when he's what, like 30, how long? That was an 8-year deal. So he'll be 30.
He'll be 36.
36, yeah. So at the end of that deal, you might be thinking, well, Landeskog at 35, 36, he might be on LTIR and they're just paying him some money. So in that sense, per year of actually playing, I think that's kind of what they're looking at. It's very similar in my mind to the Zach Hyman deal that the Edmonton Oilers gave him. 7 years, $5.5 million. And I think that if he had signed a 3 or a 4 year deal, which I think is probably a more reasonable length of time for a player like Hyman, who is generally playing injured because of the way he plays. Like, the guy can play hurt and he's still good. But he does have, he has ailments that are going on, and he has things that he's experienced in these playoff runs where at the end of it, you're like, oh, you tore that? Oh, okay. And you played through it. All right. But that's going to catch up with you, maybe not at 29, but maybe at 32. And I'm thinking that the Oilers are just, they knew they couldn't afford to pay him $7 million a year, because I think that's probably what he would have been looking for had it been a 3 or a 4 year deal. But instead, they just essentially are spreading it out over time, knowing that we'll stick you on LTIR. That's got to be the thought process.
Yeah, I can't imagine, because listen, when I look at what they just gave Ryan Nugent-Hopkins at 5.125, and I look at Zach Hyman, I think, okay, cool. I'd rather have, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on my lineup any day of the week, I think, just because his versatility, to play center or play on the wing. But, with that said, Zach Hyman obviously brings a lot of intangibles that I think, hopefully, I think Edmonton's crossing their fingers, work out pretty well with Connor McDavid, that they can mold pretty good and form some good chemistry there. And, obviously I think Hyman's brought in to create space for Connor McDavid. Not that he needs really that much space anyways with his speed and puck handling. But, hey, what, if I can say anything about Edmonton this week, my favorite move for them is probably the Warren Foegele trade, not to shift gears so quickly, but man, I like this kid. I like what he brings. He brings intangibles kind of like Zach Hyman, where I think he brings a little bit of sandpaper, a little bit of jam. And you know what? Hey, he's an RFA right now, 25. He's still got some good years ahead of him, and I think hopefully he can fill in that middle six pretty well. I think he's got a lot of potential to be a 40 to 50 point guy. And you know what? They
50 points. Playing with the right guys, certainly.
Right. Yeah, you could slot up anywhere with, Draisaitl or maybe even, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, giving them options to move up and down. And so I like that move. But, what I don't like, if we're talking about Edmonton, I'm looking all the way to Cody Ceci, what he got. Not super thrilled with that signing, if I can be honest with you. Just to shout out some numbers
4
here.
years at $325 a year. That's a price to pay for a fifth defenseman.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. He looked better last year than what he did when, his Ottawa days, when we were just, I think we tore him apart.
Well, his 1 year in Toronto definitely wasn't anything to write home about.
Right.
He had a little bit better of a year in Pittsburgh. You're right. Yeah,
and you know what? Again, that's what he is. He's a third line guy, but if you're paying, like you said, 3.25 a year for this guy, boy, he better pay out real well, because don't get me wrong, you're going to miss Oscar Klefbom on the back end there. He's going to be sorely missed. You've got Evan Bouchard, who maybe can grow a little bit and, improve. But Tyson Berry, they locked him down for a reasonable price at 4.5, and they've got Duncan Keith, Darnell Nurse back there. So they've got a decent top three. But, as far as rounding out, Cody Ceci, that signing's going to probably look pretty bad here, I think, in a couple years, especially once they have to, give Darnell Nurse – right, next year when they got to give Darnell Nurse a fat extension, because he's going to be looking at, Seth Jones and Dougie Hamilton and say, well, those guys got that, and I'm supposed to be your number one, your go-to guy. So fork over the cash here.
Yeah. I mean, the Oilers, I'll give it to them. They are a better team, I think, today than they were last season. I think at the end of of the draft, the deals they made, the players that they've acquired, I think they're a better team. And I don't hate putting your barrels into the offensive basket. Like, hey, let's go and let's spend our money on the forward position, because that's where we have to have somebody who can complement McDavid and Draisaitl, and there just hasn't been that. And so, hey, let's just patch together the defense, and if that means we don't have as much money to spend on the defense, and we're gonna throw all of our eggs into the offensive basket. And that's kind of how I see that Zach Hyman deal. And it was, of course, gutsy with their buyouts and everything else. The Oilers, in my mind, are a better team. However, I don't know that outside of, like, it's still going to come down to McDavid and Draisaitl. And last year in the playoffs, I mean, we saw the playbook on how to shut them down in the playoffs. The Jets put on a clinic. They couldn't do a thing. And you better believe that people are taking those clips, those tapes, and they are watching them over and over again anytime they're playing the Oilers, because that was how you do it. And, obviously on a night in, night out, 82-game season, you're not going to be able to play the way the Jets did, balls out and just who cares about tomorrow kind of playing. But I think there was something to take from it. And so I think that they have to have those players around them if they're not going to be so predictable.
Yeah, and before we get off the Edmonton Oiler horse here and stop killing them, but,
I was never getting off on the Edmonton Oilers.
I'm seriously concerned with not only their lack of cap space, but their goaltending situation really worries me. I mean, don't get me wrong, Mike Smith, it was a nice little renaissance last year. I enjoyed watching him play, come back basically and say, screw you, I'm still a capable goaltender, and he went out and proved it, took back that starting position, but are you going to get the Mike Smith of last year, or are you going to get the Mike Smith of the two previous years where he was just mediocre and below average-ish? So
yeah, probably that one.
Yeah, and so Mikko Koskinen, garbage in my opinion. So they have no one else in the pipeline besides Alex Stalock, and so they've got to address that somehow. This offseason, I'm not sure how they're going to do it, but they've got to move money out. I mean, getting rid of that Koskinen deal would be ideal. I mean, they've still got Yamamoto and, like I said, Warren Fogle to get re-signed still. And so, maybe Zach Cassian gets moved out too to free up some space. But at this point, they've got some work to do still.
Yes. Shall we go to a couple of one big re-signing before we jump into the rest? Because the Tampa Bay Lightning have kind of been pillaged in a way here since they win the Cup. They essentially have lost 4 of their bottom 6 forwards, Blake Coleman, and of course, oh my goodness, what's happening to me? Yanni Gourde taken in the expansion draft. They have also lost Tyler Johnson, and now of course they give Braden Point this big contract extension, 8 years, $9.5 million a year. So he's paid the same amount as Nikita Kucherov and Vasilevsky. Stamkos making 8.5, so now he's the poor man of the group. The Tampa Bay Lightning look like we're about to find out how well their drafting has been the last 3 years, as opposed to everybody talks about Braden Point and Palat and Killorn and Cirelli and Yanni Gourde, like the players that they had drafted that now had become that core of players who
who were able to fill in the rest of their lineup and be, I mean, playing above where they're playing in the lineup. Now we're going to find out how good has their drafting been recently, because there's no cap space, none, like absolutely none. They are at 0, and they don't have a whole lot going on down below. They didn't do a whole lot today, and obviously there's, everybody's really high on Matthew Joseph. He is apparently going to be the savior of the Tampa Bay Lightning's bottom half, because that's kind of what we've got going on. And I guess Pierre-Edouard Bellemare and Zach Bogosian comes back to the Lightning. So that's kind of what we've got for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Do you see a little more deconstruction of this team before everything is said and done?
Yeah, maybe not this year, maybe not this summer, but I think at some point. Luckily for the Lightning, I mean, Andre Palat's deal is up after this year, and I think it wouldn't shock me if he gets moved at some point this offseason. Again,
this offseason. So you think that he might get dealt now? See, yeah, I don't know if I see that, because then you're just losing another player for nothing. He doesn't have anything beyond this year. So I don't think that he's going to go anywhere. I mean, unless, they think they're not going to make the playoffs. But I think this is still a great team. They're still a playoff team. I don't think that they're going to trade Andre Palat. I think that at the end of this offseason, they right now have $3.4 million in cap space next year. They have nothing. And you're right. And Palat is a UFA. So that's where that comes into play. Like next year, he's a UFA. They will have no money to re-sign him unless they get rid of someone like a McDonough, which you're not going to do that now. I mean, and then you got to pay Sergachev in a couple years. This is going to get interesting for the Lightning.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. So, I mean, look, they're going to get a couple $2 million in cap space this year, just because once they put Brent Seabrook on IR, that's going to free up some space. And same with next year too, right? That 6.8 going on top of that 3.4 will create a little bit of wiggle room for them to sign some guys. But again, you're not going to have that opportunity to sign any big name top 6 guys, right? Or top 4 defensemen at that point. Because you have to look down the road, right? Mikhail Sergachev, next year, he's going to be up for a contract extension. So obviously he's looked very, very good in a top role for them. So it wouldn't surprise me if he gets a few extra $1 million a year. But, with Andre Palat, you got to ask yourself, is this going to be a guy that you're going to re-sign? Is it going to be a guy that you're going to say, hey, you know what, we're going to ride it out. We make the playoffs, we bring him with us, and then we lose him for nothing? Or do you want to move him now and get something in return that maybe you can parlay into, a long-term player, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Because you mentioned draft picks, right? Don't forget, the last couple seasons, the Tampa Bay Lightning have pretty much dealt off their first-round draft picks to bring in talent so they could win, right? And it paid off. They got their cups, and good for them. But now you're going to start to see the effects of that, right? You talked about it. Matthew Joseph, Ross Colton. These guys have got to basically step up and fill in that gap that's going to be missed by guys like Yanni Gourde and Tyler Johnson. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, Tyler Johnson way overpaid for what he does, but he's still a very, very good third-line player who brings a lot of speed. He brings penalty kill, and he's very versatile as far as playing center and on the wings. So
yeah, if Chicago can convince Marc-Andre Fleury to come and actually play there, they might have a decent team next year.
Absolutely, yeah. So with Seth Jones locked up, they gave him $9.5 million for 8 years. So good on them now. Just like Braden Point, but obviously the difference in Florida is they don't have the taxes to deal with, so that number looks a little bit more skewed. But longer term, again, we're going to maybe see the effects of, this salary cap crunch that Tampa Bay is going to be in down the road, especially when they have to start handing out some more extensions and some more money to some guys. But
yeah, this is the downside of a cap system, is that it's really hard to stay good for a really long time, because your good players are going to want their money, and you either pay them or you don't, and you just let them go, and then then you don't have them anymore. So,
yeah. And do we get to a point in the next couple of years where they say, okay, Steven Stamkos has got to go because we just can't afford to have that 8.5 on the books?
Yeah, I mean, he's the most logical person to go. Like, they've won their 2 cups. They're going to get another run here, and I think that we'll see what his season looks like. Of course, if he goes and rattles off 60 plus points, nobody's going to say they need to trade him because he's putting up 60 plus points. It's just a matter of, can he stay healthy? Can he stay productive? And I think at some point in that contract, which, there's always the chance as a guy nears the end of his big, like, prime deal, that, maybe that number doesn't look as good anymore. And I think that there's still a chance that it'll look good here. But, Steven Stamkos is the most logical person to get dealt because he's the oldest of the crew.
Yeah.
Speaking of teams that are up against the cap now, the Vegas Golden Knights have made some pretty interesting moves here. They go and they acquire Evgeny Dadonov for Nick Holden and a third-round pick from the Ottawa Senators. And so they bring in a pretty lethal winger to kind of complement what they have going on here. I mean, this is a team that has decided that centers be damned, we are just going to get every good winger we can, and they'll make the center better. Yeah. It's almost like that's what they're. I mean, they've got William Karlsson, and they did go out and sign Janmark, who can play center. He also plays the wing, and then you got Chandler Stevenson, who was their top center at many points here last year. So the Vegas Golden Knights just, hey, there's no centers available. Well, what are you going to do? Well, go out and just find really talented wingers, and they'll get the job done. I really like this move with Evgeny Dadonov. I was also very surprised that they were able to re-sign Alec Martinez to a 3-year, $5.25 AAV, and that kind of shores up their defense. Like that seals the deal for them. We know who their top 4 defensemen are, and it's shaping up to look pretty good for them. I thought that they would probably lose Alec Martinez, and suddenly their back end would not look quite as effective. And here we are. Martinez stays a Golden Knight.
Yeah, love the signing. I think it worked out pretty well, and I'm glad they didn't give him any more than 3 years, because to me, I was just looking at him and I'm saying, you know what, he's getting old. The way he plays the game, I think, any more than 3 years would have me worried.
Yeah, especially at age. I mean, at 33, you're not going to give a guy a 5-year deal at 33. Not unless he's Alex Ovechkin.
Yeah. Now, as far as again, the center position is concerned, it's funny. Kelly McCrimmon came out and he basically said, I don't know the quote exactly, but he said, you know what? Hey, everybody outside, external of our team, has been saying we got a centerman problem, but internally we don't feel that way. So again,
Sounds like a really good salesperson.
Right. I mean, hey, don't get me wrong. I like that they brought in Nolan Patrick. That was a low risk, high reward move that I think he can pay off if he can somehow find his form.
Absolutely.
Stay healthy.
Yeah, it was a great move.
Yeah. So maybe he might work out and be their number one center long term. Who knows?
Plus, I think that if, when Nolan Patrick first came into the NHL, when he was drafted, I think that if you were to say, hey, we want Nolan Patrick, probably a player that we'd love him to become, would be like a Mark Stone style player at the center position.
Yeah,
I mean, what a great player to have alongside of him to teach him how to play this defensive game, and Mark Stone. It took him a minute to be this player in the NHL that everyone looked at as a star. Early on in his career, he kind of flew under the radar a little bit. I think that's just because he was in Ottawa, but he also bounced around between the pros and the minors, and then he had his big coming out season faster than what Nolan Patrick has had. But maybe there's some veteran leadership in that locker room that can get Nolan Patrick going. I think it just wasn't working in Philadelphia. That was pretty clear. Nothing was. I mean, Philadelphia has come out and said that their issue, they didn't have good chemistry in their locker room, and that's why they've gone out and made some big changes. Of course, they trade Voracek for Cam Atkinson, and I think that this is this is a good move for Nolan Patrick to be able to come and be a part of a team that just they don't really know much else than winning at this point. Team.
That's that's very true. And so we'll see if they can do it now without their franchise draft pick, Marc-Andre Fleury. I feel kind of bad the way he had to go out, and so he's obviously going to consider if he wants to continue his career in Chicago. Like you mentioned, hopefully Chicago can sell him on it because I think they're going to be very competitive this year.
Well, at the end, that was just disappointing that you trade the guy who was the face of your franchise, and you don't even tell him.
Right.
What?
I mean, I know they quote unquote had their phone calls about it, the possibility, but when you got to find out that the deal's actually done on Twitter, I mean, yes, this world, the insiders, they get stuff out pretty quick, but I mean, still, you could have called the guy.
yeah, you definitely should have called. Like, if that's the way that the world is that, hey, as soon as we make this official, or even before an insider is going to find out, well, then you should be telling the guy, like, hey, get Mark on the phone now. Tell him he's about to be dealt.
Right.
Before it ever happens. Like, just crazy to find that out on Twitter is brutal. And honestly, I'm surprised that Chicago was like, yeah, hey, don't worry about telling him. We don't want to talk to him or anything before we deal for him. Or was Vegas just like, nah, you don't get to talk to him?
Who knows how that conversation went? I wish I could have been a fly on the wall. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'd love to find that out. Now, speaking of maybe the biggest splash of the day, the New Jersey Devils kind of come out of freaking nowhere and sign Dougie Hamilton to a $9 million a year contract over 7 years. He gets 63 million bones, and the New Jersey Devils sign probably the most coveted free agent defenseman out there.
Yeah, that's real shocking. I mean, they made some good moves today, and I'm kind of guessing that they were probably the only team that really came out and said, we'll give you that kind of term in cash. I think, don't get me wrong, Dougie Hamilton's a tremendous right-handed, offensive-minded defenseman, but maybe, other teams were like, no, we're not really willing to take that risk. We want to, play it a little bit more cautious and maybe go, 4 or 5 years at that kind of money. Who knows, right? But maybe maybe the brass in New Jersey was like, hey, you know what? The first year or two might be a little rough, but you know what? We've got a number one caliber goaltender, Mackenzie Blackwood. We've got PK coming off the books here after this year, so we're going to have cap space to spend next year again too. And then we've got these freaking amazing centers in Nico Hischier and Jack Hughes that are going to be superstars, are going to be like an ultimate number 1-2 pairing down the middle. So maybe there's a bright spot there for this team in the future that they sold Dougie Hamilton on.
Hey, obviously Dougie Hamilton, and he's not going to go sign somewhere where they're not saying, yeah, of course we're going to give you the reins at the power play. Like he's going to get every opportunity to put up some fat numbers.
For sure.
The one team made a signing today. Actually, I'll say the Dallas Stars as a whole. They made some nice splashes. They get Ryan Suter at 4 years, $14.6 million, so a $365 cap hit for Ryan Suter, which is fantastic. Of course, he's getting paid on top of that too from the Minnesota Wild. Right. They get your boy Luke Glendening, who Jim Nill, I believe, when he was in Detroit, my guess is that he helped to bring Glendening to Detroit when he was drafted. He was undrafted, but born in Grand Rapids. Obviously, signed his first contract with Detroit in 2013. So Jim Nill wouldn't have been there yet. I don't remember.
Was around. Yeah.
In 2013, he was yeah.
Yeah.
So a little connection there. And then, of course, Braden Holtby, after being bought out by the Vancouver Canucks, signs with the Dallas Stars. And this is the move that has me, I'll say, scratching my head in some ways, but also, you've got Ben Bishop, Anton Khudobin, Braden Holtby. All those players could be injured at the exact same time. It's hard to believe that Braden Holtby's only 31 years old, because the way that he's bounced around the last couple years and the way that he's talked about is like, oh, Holtby, so old, so worn down, and he's only 31. Meanwhile, Ben Bishop's 34, Khudobin's 35. This is a weird three-headed monster. Do you think one of these guys get dealt?
Yeah, but it's just a matter of when, right? Because I think, from what I understand, Ben Bishop's going to start the year on LTIR, which is, I think, part of the reason they wanted Braden Holtby, because who knows with Khudobin what his injury status is at. I guess he's healthy from what I understand, so he's probably going to start the season. But you've got this other goaltender that they were expecting to be the long-term, successor to their net issues, and Jake Ottinger, who had a pretty decent year last year, 29 games, 911 save percentage. I thought he looked good as, a 1B to Khudobin's 1A, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, especially, he's a first round pick in 2017. You got to think that you're drooling over the idea of your first round pick goaltender turning into your actual goaltender.
Right.
Like, that's the dream. I feel like everyone that drafts a goalie in the first round is taking a huge risk because you're risking a first round pick on a goalie. So you really need it to work. So yeah, I'm surprised that this is what we're left with. 3 goaltenders ahead of him as well, but I gotta think that someone might be on the move, and maybe you're in conversation with Colorado, going, hey, and you're right. Maybe it's once everyone's healthy, but if you know that you have Ottinger, then what are you waiting for?
Right. I don't get the hold up here. Maybe they decided, hey, let's bring in Holtby. He's a guy we think we can rehabilitate, right? Because they play a very good defensive game, and I think it might work out well for Holtby there. But at the same time, maybe they're looking at the goaltending market and just saying, hey, we're just going to go ahead and grab us one anyways, because we know teams are going to be desperate after a while and they'll overpay for somebody. So now you look at a team like, for example, Colorado, right? They couldn't get Grubauer signed.
Like Colorado couldn't have gone out and said, hey, Braden Holtby, we'll give you 2.1.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe they weren't even looking at Holtby, right? Maybe they didn't even call him yet at that point. Maybe they were so sure of themselves that they were going to get Grubauer re-signed that they didn't even bother calling anybody else. I doubt that, but maybe Holtby wasn't on their radar. And so, they decided to go up and snag him for relatively cheap. And so maybe they're looking at Colorado now and be like, hey, we got Khudobin here. Why don't you dangle us a couple second rounders or something, and we'll give them to you. So,
gives them the ability to move their other players. Were there any other teams that you looked at today and loved what they did, or maybe hated what they did?
Yeah, you know what? I actually, LA for me was a big one that I really loved what they did. I loved the Alexander Edler move. I thought that was really smart. They get him at 3.5. He's still got wheels. He's still got some offensive ability left in him, and so you don't need him to really play defense because you've got some of these other defensemen like Sean Walker and Matt Roy who can maybe fill that gap as far as that's concerned for you. But I really love the signing of Philip Deneau. I'll just come out and say it. $5.5 million, I think, is a steal for this guy. I was expecting him to get closer to maybe $6.5 million, the way he plays the two-way game. I actually thought he would have been a perfect fit in Vegas to play on a line with Matt Stone. Those two defensive-minded players together would have just destroyed, I think, other people's top lines.
It's funny because I think that deal is going to come back to bite them.
It wouldn't surprise me if in the last couple of years of that deal, yes, it doesn't work out so well. But I think at 5.5,
I struggle paying a guy that much money for somebody who's scored 27 goals in the last 3 years combined. We're talking analytics, over 200 games. He's scored 27 goals.
Yeah, but he's a 50 point. Goals. Yeah, well, I'm not expecting him to score goals, right? I think they brought in Victor Arvidsson to play on that second line to generate some offense as far as goal scoring concerned. They've got, they're bringing back, Anthony Seo on a 1-year deal, so he's got, an opportunity to prove himself that maybe he can get close, get back close to that 30 goal pace that he had a few years back. Obviously, I don't think he's going to hit 30 goals, but he could put up 20 goals again in that middle six there. But again, Philip Deneau, I love the signing because I think right now, at least for the next 3-4 years, you give a great opportunity for a guy by the name of Quentin Byfield to really develop, right? You don't have to rush him in and say, we need you at the number 2 center spot right now because we lost Jeff Carter last year to a trade. So now they get an opportunity for him to develop, to really blossom correctly, and you don't have to rush him in. And that,
okay, I can give you that. I can give you that signing Deneau gives you time for Byfield to develop at the center position rather than feeling like you have to throw him on the wing to get him more time. I can get on board with that. And of course, there's nothing stopping you from moving Deneau later on. And I guess if you think you're going to be good within the next 3 years, then Deneau won't be a bad third line center to have for the playoffs. I just wonder the way that he plays, if how good he can be for how long. And I know he had a great playoff, but people kind of just started talking about him in this way in these playoffs. And that's kind of what makes me a little worried, I know he's put up a 53-point season, in the shortened season last year, 2 years ago, he would have had over 50 points. He was on pace for somewhere around 35, 40 points in 2021. But in 22 playoff games, he's got one goal. It's just a lot to pay to somebody who doesn't score.
Sure. No, I understand the sentiment there for sure. Yeah.
Not that LA is worried about winning cups or anything anytime soon. So maybe and is this Alex Edler signing there? Is this him just kind of giving up? Like, well, they'll pay me the most money, so I'll go to LA. I get to live in the sunny LA, and I don't want to be in Vancouver anymore. Like, he probably could have found his way in Vancouver if he was willing to take a 1 year, $2 million kind of deal, but he obviously wants to get paid. And I can't bash him for getting paid, but you're signing in LA. LA is not going to be good. In my mind, Alex Edler, he doesn't really care about playing for that good of a team. He just wants to get paid.
Well,
sure what it looks like to me.
Oh boy. All right, let's move on.
Okay. Any other teams that you really liked what they did? How about the Carolina Hurricanes?
Yeah, I would love to talk about the goaltending swap there, right?
Shoot. Out goes Mrazek, out goes Nedeljkovic, and in comes Freddie Anderson and Antti Ranta, and basically Freddie Anderson traded for Peter Mrazek because Mrazek's going to Toronto, signing for $1 million less a year than Anderson, which I think is probably about right. But Antti Ranta, 2 years, $2 million per year is... has the potential to be a spicy deal, because if he can stay healthy, he is very good, and he doesn't have a lot of playing time under his belt. So yes, he's 32 years old, but he's also only played in 198 NHL games. So it's not like he's been playing for 15 years now.
No, I love the fact that they got both these guys in, and you're paying a 1A and 1B combo. I mean, either one of these guys could potentially, play 30, 40 games, no problem. And so $6.5 million for both these guys is basically going to be, peanuts for the next couple of years. It's a great value as far as goaltending goes. But the bigger concern I have for Carolina is if you're willing to give Freddie Anderson $4.5 million, and granted, he has a much larger sample size, why were you not willing to give Nedeljkovic $3.5 million, which is what I understand he wanted in Carolina, but got $3 million in Detroit? Why were you not willing to give him $3.5 million a season to be your potential future goaltender for the next, 10 years? Like, why did you need to go this route to where it even got to where now you got to pay a little bit more to get a starting goaltender in here?
Well, maybe they saw something in his game that they were willing to pay him $3, or he was willing. They were willing to pay him $3, and he wanted $3.5, so they traded him just because. Maybe it was their line in the sand, and they said, "Fine, have fun in Detroit. You don't want to play for a good team? Go ahead." I mean,
they're definitely tight as far as money is concerned. They definitely watch their budget.
Well,
so, maybe that was it.
You look at what they're doing with the goaltending position. I think they're kind of going, "Hey, we've gotten this done by committee. We're a good team." It's not like they lost because of their goaltending. I think that I appreciate what they're doing. I mean, unless you have a bona fide all-star goaltender, there's no reason to overpay for a goalie. Not at all. So I like what they're doing. I also like Anthony DeAngelo coming to Carolina. after leaving the Rangers, and I know things weren't great there, but I think that he will find a home in Carolina. He's going to replace Dougie Hamilton on the right side, and who knows? Who knows what he can be turned into by Rod Brindamore? Hopefully, that relationship it goes better than the Rangers did.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And I mean, yes, if there's a team that has the personnel management wise to really, fix a broken and, a character guy, Carolina would be a team to do it. They've got great upper management. They've got, like you said, Rod Brindamore, great coaching. He doesn't take, shit from anybody. So, he's much bigger than most of the guys on the team anyway. So he frightens me just from that aspect. So, but you know what? They've also don't have to play Tony DeAngelo either, right? They've got a load of defensemen, Ian Cole, Ethan Bear, are going to fill out, that bottom pairing there. So they've got guys to play. And so, who knows if, how much ice time he's actually going to see. Maybe they signed him on and said, hey, you know what? We're going to start you off in the minors. You got to prove it to us. You got to show us that you want this. We want to see, good results as far as, off ice antics are concerned. And, maybe it pans out, but, we'll see. Still, as far as Carolina is concerned, I don't mind the goaltending signings. I think it could really work out very, very well as far as Antti Raanta is concerned. Now, when you look at Toronto, Peter Mrazek, I love the signing. I think he's going to be, a very, very good goaltender for Toronto. As long as he stays healthy, he's going to put up some decent numbers. And the great thing about Mrazek, and you always watch whenever there's a big game, right? And the game's on the series is on the line. He's a guy who has stepped up in the past and has always shown that ability not to flinch under pressure. Again, as long as he stays healthy. And so I think come playoff time, that could really work out in Toronto's, benefit for that.
Yeah. Between him and Jack Campbell, I think it's a really nice 1A, 1B, and they'll likely ride whoever plays better during the season into the playoffs. Yep. I know that Sheldon Keefe loves him some Jack Campbell, but I think Peter Mrazek has matured very much so as a goaltender. And hey, if you have Mrazek and then you go and you re-sign Jack Campbell to 2 or 3 more years after this one, he could sign an extension anytime or just wait till the offseason. I think that they'd be in a good position for a couple years with both of those guys, and you wouldn't have to pay a whole lot, which based on the rest of the structure of the Leafs, they're going to have to go cheap on their goaltending and look for those value deals. I also like what they did this offseason compared to last offseason, where they've kind of, last year they did the big names, the Joe Thornton and Wayne Simmons, and obviously bringing back Jason Spezza, which Spezza kind of in a league of his own in terms of those veteran signings because he actually did play really well. But this year in this offseason, the Leafs go out, they sign Michael Bunting, Curtis Gabriel, and David Kampf. And I like that they're bringing in some depth from younger players who they know can play the way that they want them to play. I think that it's more akin to trying to create that somewhere in the third and fourth lines with some energy and players who, they're mature enough. They're 25, 26, 28, but they aren't these super overage veterans who, they're looking for their cup, and so they're coming to Toronto to win their cup. No, these guys are still midway through their career, and they're looking to do something and maybe get paid again. And so I think there's a different mindset when you're some of these younger guys, mid-age players who maybe haven't been given certain opportunities on other teams, and now they come to Toronto and want to see what they can do. So I like what Dubas did bringing in those 3 guys today.
Yeah, and I really like the PTO they gave Hosang as well.
Hosang,
I think that could work out pretty good for Toronto. I mean, it's a low risk, high reward type of move where you could find a guy that could, fit in with your middle 6 if you want to, and really can move up and down that, second and third line and give you some options, right? If, he works out well in camp and really shows that he wants to be back in the NHL again.
Yeah, absolutely. There was particularly one move by the San Jose Sharks that left me a little scratch in my head, maybe 2. Andrew Cogliano signing there 1 year, $1 million. I think that he's likely to be a player traded at the deadline, but it is kind of I guess a roster filling type of move. But then Nick Bonino, 2 years, $4.1 million, so basically a $2 million cap hit. Thought that signing was interesting for Nick Bonino, a guy he's been in some championship teams and had the opportunity to probably sign with some good teams. I got to imagine that there were some high end teams that would have been willing to pay Nick Bonino $2 million a year, maybe only for 1 year. I'm sure he wanted that too, but to go to the San Jose Sharks instead is an interesting option, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And the Sharks team, I think, is kind of showing some signs of we're going to go and fill in some pieces, but are they really going to be any good? Probably not with James Reimer as their goalie.
Well, so here's my thought on that is, maybe the Sharks sold them on the fact that they say, hey, you know what? The last year, year and a half, 2 years, is fluke. We're still a quality team. We still got guys that were making championship runs here a few years ago for us. And so, we think between Aiden Hill and James Reimer, they can, I feel like that's going to be a much better combination in that for them than it was with Martin Jones in there for sure. So,
yeah, well, at least they bought out Martin Jones, who subsequently signs with the Philadelphia Flyers.
Right. Yeah. So,
which by the way, the Philadelphia Flyers sneaking in Keith Yandel 1 year, $900K.
Yeah, that'll be a nice.
That's going to look nice. And if Philadelphia isn't in the playoffs, they might be able to get a second round pick for Keith Yandel at the deadline.
Yeah, he's going to be that great third line defenseman who quarterbacks your power play and just sneakily brings you some offense. But as far as San Jose is concerned, Nick Bonino maybe saw an opportunity there to get more ice time than maybe some of the other teams that he was being offered, because we know obviously Logan Couture and he's pretty much it down the middle. And then after that, really there's no for sure number 2 center. Maybe Tomas Hertl, maybe you throw him at the center position. But, maybe Nick Bonino was sold on the fact that said, hey, we want to move Hertl back to the wing. We'll have you play the number 2 spot, maybe give you some more ice time. And who knows, maybe, getting to play with Erik Karlsson or Brent Burns was, maybe on the top of his list. I don't know. But, I imagine, like you said, I don't think there were probably many teams willing to give him a couple of years. And so that's why he probably signed.
Yeah. Yep. That's it. Exactly. Okay. Maybe last one, unless you've got a whole bunch more in your back pocket. I mean, we could talk, there's 120 signings. We could talk all day, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I would like to touch on just the Calgary Flames for a minute. They signed Blake Coleman, one of the first signings of the day, to a deal worth $4.9 million a season. I believe it was a 6 year deal. $29.4 million going to Blake Coleman. Good for him. That's what winning 2 Stanley Cups in a row will do for you, playing on that third line with Barclay Goodrow and Yanni Gourde. And now he gets to go to Calgary. And I like this move because Calgary needed a kind of just some fresh blood to come in and play in their top 6. So I like that. Something I might like even more, though, is them signing Trevor Lewis to just a 1 year, $800K. And I think what he could do for their bottom 6 is akin to what Blake Coleman can maybe do to their top 6, is just kind of inject some life. And while I don't love paying Blake Coleman for the next 6 years, it maybe was the necessary evil. Like, if you really think that this Flames team just kind of had a crap year and they could do something, especially after bringing in Markstrom last offseason. You've got Johnny Gaudreau, who's a UFA, Matthew Tkachuk's an RFA. Like, things are going to start to adjust here in Calgary. And this signing, it kind of protects you for the future. He can score goals if Gaudreau left, or if they end up dealing him at the deadline if they're not in a position. But also maybe it's a way to go, hey, Johnny, I know it's been a little rough lately, but we're going to give you better people to play with. How about that?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I don't hate the signing, and I love, what Coleman brings to the table. I think he's got a lot of jam, and he can fill in really good in a middle 6 role. But as far as term and cap hit is concerned, I think he's a little overpaid for my liking. I would have probably liked it closer to 4. But again, that's kind of maybe where the market was, because he was a guy that a lot of teams were after. And I know he was getting a lot of interest just because, again, when you watched him in these last 2 playoff runs with Tampa, I mean, he's a spark plug and someone that you want on your middle six to inject some life and to, provide some offense when, your top guys are being shut down. But for me, I think you're going to look at the end of this contract the last few years and say, oh man, this is a little rough. This might hurt us a little bit. But all in all, though, I think, to get a guy like that locked up, they're going to have to do it. And so hopefully we don't see a reminiscence of 2016. I'm seeing a lot of deals here where, maybe a little bit more term than maybe I would have liked. But hey, you know what?
Teams are shooting out that term because the AAV, they can't do the AAV right now.
Right, exactly. So hopefully it doesn't come back to bite them. But obviously, I think, again, Blake Coleman's going to add a lot of jam to this team. I like his game, and so hopefully it works out well. But it could all come crumbling down anyways if Monahan and Goudreau just say, see you later in the next 2 seasons, and that's it. And then you're basically rewriting the ship again and having to reload and start from scratch because you just lost your number 1 center and top scorer. So
exactly. Okay, I have one question to you before we quit here. Who finishes last next year? The Buffalo Sabres, Arizona Coyotes, or the Anaheim Ducks? Who do you have?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of Anaheim. I think they finish much better than last. But for me personally, I'm going to say Buffalo because I do think at some point this offseason before training camp, I think Jack Eichel gets dealt. Again, it's not a matter of if he gets dealt. It's just a matter of when, in my opinion. And when you lose your top center and, not only that, but then they lost other pieces like Sam Reinhart this offseason. Yes, they brought in Will Butcher on a trade from New Jersey, which, again, was just a move so they could have cap room to sign Dougie Hamilton. But,
right.
Outside of Rasmus Dahlin, there's not much there as far as defense is concerned. Ristolainen's gone. And then not only that, too, but now they literally have no goaltenders. So, I mean, if you don't have anybody stopping the puck, maybe they go, again, now go out and, overpay for, goaltender, basically a backup goaltender to be their starter. Who knows? I mean, gosh, I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to have to trade somebody, and maybe they bring somebody back over, and part of the Eichel package, they can swing a goaltender in there too.
Or they just don't they just don't need a goalie. They can guarantee they'll lose every game. They don't even have to have a goalie.
Right.
6 skaters all night. By the way, just a little bit ago, it's around 3:30 p.m. today, which is Wednesday, July 28th. Apparently, Bob McKenzie says that essentially everything is very quiet on the Eichel front right now. The Buffalo Sabres, and I quote this, the Buffalo Sabres are just saying, different teams might have interest, but right now the interest is on the back burner. The Sabres are saying that's just the reality of the market right now, and everybody's going to sit tight. It's not an ideal situation for the Sabres and Eichel, but as of right now, it's really soft, really quiet. And that is Bob McKenzie. So,
yeah, I mean,
obviously, there's not much going on right now, even though teams, apparently Minnesota's out. As of 8 hours ago, Minnesota has said that they are no longer trying to acquire Jack Eichel.
Yeah, Minnesota's out. I think they'd have to give up too much than they would feel comfortable with to bring him over. LA, I know, is out now that they brought in Philip Deneau, so I think they're out of the question. Really the big name, the big ticket, right, would be a team like the New York Rangers, right? They would have to probably throw in Mika Zibanejad and get him to go over there, or some other big piece. I don't know, maybe a Capo Caco. They could throw in a goaltender there. They've got, Gorgiev. They could throw him in that package, and Buffalo could get their goaltender there. But, I mean, really, when you look at the free agent market, I think, a lot of teams are going to get the players that they absolutely need, to get signed, see where they're at cap-wise, and then revisit this, I think, in, maybe a week or something,
yep.
When things calm down a little bit. But, as far as, Buffalo's concerned, I was just taking a peek at the free agent goaltending market, and I mean, really, the biggest names out there right now you look at are Henrik Lundqvist, Devin Dubnyk, and Anders Nielsen. So maybe they sign one of those guys. Who knows? But Buffalo, hopefully, they can find a way to move Eichel here soon because it's killing me inside.
Yeah, we'll see. Some other big names that are just still sitting out there. I know that Zach Parise hasn't had the greatest of last couple of years, but he is still a free agent. David Krejci, Tuukka Rask, as we talked about earlier. Brendan Saad still hanging out there, and so is Derek Stepan. Travis Zajac still out there. Thomas Tatar, who put up some decent numbers this year, 30 points in 50 games. Ryan Palmieri, he's still hanging out. So is Tyler Bozak. So there are some nice players that are still out there, at least from an offensive standpoint. Eric Stahl, I know that he maybe is just a shell of himself, but somebody will probably bring him in for a second if he doesn't retire. It'll be interesting. I mean, there's still a lot left to go, so we'll see who ends up sneaking in there. Sammy Vatanen, also a UFA. Who would have thought that Sammy Vatanen would constantly be a UFA like 3 years ago, when it seemed like he was one of the most sought after potential free agents at the time. Any last thoughts before we sign off, Justin?
No, just like I said, somebody please trade for Jack Eichel.
All right, there it is, Jack Eichel. If Jack, if you want to tweet at us, let us know how you're doing. We take it as a compliment. You can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk, and we will continue bringing you all the free agent news as it comes. And now that we're in summertime, I think it's time we bring back some top 10. So be out looking for those. We'll talk to you guys soon.